So topic 7 is about water use. And so this kind of leads into some of our other topics that are pushed to the latter half of the course. We're going to talk about pollution and water treatment and those kind of things. And we did talk a little bit about water usage way back, I think, in topic 1 or topic 2. And so what I want to do today is kind of flesh out this a bit more and a little bit more detail. So one thing to say about water usage is that we're very lucky to be in Canada. We're a very water-rich country. Most of our country has access to safe drinking water. And it's not something we as Canadians typically think about a lot. But I know some of you are from other countries, and other countries sometimes have water scarcity being a big issue. And even some municipalities in Canada as well. But like I said, it's something most of us aren't really thinking about very often unless there's a boil water advisory or something like that. Another way to think about water is our water footprint. And that really just means the amount of water that is consumed to produce goods and services. And because Canada is water rich, we tend to be a lot more wasteful with our water, which means our water footprint is a lot higher per person. And like I said, there's different ways to look at water footprint. You could talk about the water footprint per person, which is what is shown on this map here. And you could also look at the water footprint per item. And in terms of agriculture, you can see there's some values there. So the water footprint of barley, for example, is 650, and I think that represents liters. Let's see here. Oh no, one drop is 50 liters. So barley and wheat and plants tend to have a lesser water footprint. As you move into animal products, the water footprint is a lot higher, and probably no surprise there because it just has to do with the food chain, and that cow, for example, has to eat all these plants, which also required watering to make the actual cow. And so this is something that's talked about a lot, and particularly nowadays when states and provinces are trying to think about laws around water usage. These are things that we have to start thinking about. For example, pistachios have a really high water footprint. And so why are we growing pistachios in California where there's a water scarcity going on right now? And so these are questions that have to be asked, right? In terms of, I think in terms of our future and what's going on with our water resources. Something we certainly think a lot less about in most parts of Canada because we are water rich. Here's some numbers for water in Canada. The amount of fresh water is huge. 1.2 million square kilometers. That's more than 10% of our actual country. That's just incredible. A big part of this, of course, is the Great Lakes. So that's 244,000 square kilometers. And in terms of the supply of renewable fresh water, it's about 3.5 square kilometers. So this is a massive amount of water. Hopefully that's obvious. I can't even conceive of a square kilometer, never mind how much water that is. How much water is used in Canadian households? So something we'll get into in the next few slides here is you can see that we have a lot of water and we're using, maybe less than 1%, right, for our households. But there are a lot of other uses for water, of course. Going back to, I guess I meant to put this slide earlier, in terms of where there are threats to water scarcity in Canada. And I can't remember if I showed you this map before or not, but there are parts of Alberta. So down here, if you've ever been down in this part of Alberta, you probably know if you've been to Lethbridge or Medicine Hat, it's pretty dry there. In fact, some of those parts of Alberta are considered deserts. And that's actually a very agricultural dense part of Alberta as well. And also Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Again, we've got major agriculturally dense parts of the country. And these are areas where, we're withdrawing a lot of water for that agriculture. And last year in particular was really bad in terms of the amount of rain. And so they are at risk regions. I don't know if anyone was in Saskatchewan last summer. I did. I drove through it, and I'm trying to remember exactly when that was now. I think it was at the end of July, and things were looking pretty dry. But when I came back 2 weeks later, I've never seen it like that. The fields were brown, and I think the farmers were probably having a really hard time. I don't know a ton about it, but I just know it was pretty bad. So why are we, what are some of the threats to freshwater? Climate change. This is something that people are obviously devoting a lot of time and effort into trying to understand what's going on, and of course, what the predictions are going to be. And so climate change, if you have a change in climate, that means you have change in patterns of precipitation. And so this is something that we're definitely trying to keep an eye on, and that may dictate future policies. Sometimes there are contaminants, new industries or other things can cause pollution, and these are things that can change our water supply. Algal blooms. I'd mentioned that Lake Winnipeg has been suffering for a couple of decades now. These massive algal blooms, and it's changed the tourist industry and the fishing industry quite dramatically. And there's all sorts of other human-caused activities. I guess pollution and agriculture runoff, that kind of fits all one category. And we're going to talk about pollution in the next topic 8, I believe, as we talk about pollution. So I'll kind of get into more of that when we get there. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I showed you this slide before, way back at the beginning of the semester, and this is showing what we are using our water for. And notice that number 1 is this one here. The top one is the total, right? So electric power generation. This is using a massive amount of water compared to all of our other water uses entirely. You can see manufacturing is number 2, and households comes in at number 3. So manufacturing, that includes all sorts of things. You'll notice that the oil and gas is actually considered a different type of industry from manufacturing, and it's in there. It's in the top 10. But for all of Canada, it's not huge compared to the other things there. Crop and animal production. So this would be, of course, agriculture, and in all its various forms. I'll show you some Alberta numbers here in a minute. Here's Alberta numbers, and so notice in Alberta, irrigation is number 1. And this is all that stuff going on down in the Calgary and Lethbridge region, all that farmland, basically between Edmonton and Lethbridge. We have a massive amount of farming in Canada. In fact, Alberta is about 60% of all of irrigation in Canada. So pretty incredible. A lot of people don't know that, realize that Alberta does more irrigation than all of the other provinces combined. And if you drive through Alberta, you know that there's a lot of farms and there's a lot of cows, a lot of other things down there if you drive through some of that farmland. If you're just sticking on the main highways, you don't see quite as much of it, of course. You can see number 2 is cooling. This, of course, means for power generation, so electricity again. And so it's number 2 in Alberta. And then number 3 is municipal, which happens to be number 3 overall in Canada. The other thing I like about this slide, it shows that most of Alberta water is from surface water, and a very small percentage is from groundwater. And this is the case pretty much all over Canada. In the States, they rely a lot more on groundwater in certain areas than we do in Canada. In Canada, we just have rivers and lakes almost everywhere. So we're very, very lucky water-wise. So just a few notes about some of these things before we move on. Power generation, like I said, I don't know how much you guys know about the processes of power generation, but often they need water as a coolant. And why water? Well, water has a high specific heat, and it's abundant, it's cheap, those kind of things. So what we're talking about is basically the water gets warmer, and it's usually put back in the environment, but sometimes we're talking about thermal pollution. And there's different ways that they have to deal with this. Back in my hometown, there is a power generation station, and the climate there is very similar to here. This time of year, everything is frozen, the ice is super thick. But when you drive down the highway near that generation station, there's actually one lake there that is always open. And this is where they dump their water. Now, you're not necessarily allowed to do that anymore nowadays. Usually they have to hold it in ponds before putting it back in the environment. But when the plant was first constructed, that was what they did with it, right? And so they're still allowed to do that because, well, everything in that lake is dead anyway, unfortunately. There's some numbers for you. You can see that fossil fuel plants use less than nuclear generation plants. And of course, there's all sorts of different technologies that I really don't know lots about. Ontario is number one for power generation. I don't know if everyone knew that. And it's actually a major exporter for Ontario and Quebec as well. Agriculture. So a big percentage of agriculture is, of course, irrigation. So that means you're providing water for your plants. And then livestock, of course, do take up some water as well. So you can see that this other thing here, if I just go back to power generation, we do use a lot of water for power generation, but the water itself is not polluted or necessarily consumed. It can be returned to the environment as long as it's cooled down. Whereas agriculture, you can see this stat here, only 25% of the water actually is being returned to the source. So this is actually a huge consumer of water because that water is not put back into the rivers or anything like that. It's going into the ground generally or is evaporated and whatnot. So it is a big part of water being consumed. I already told you this stat. Alberta has about 60% of the irrigated cropland in Canada. And much of this is the Saskatchewan River Basin. So if you take a look at where the Saskatchewan River is, it runs through and all around southern Alberta and through and into Saskatchewan. And we apparently remove a huge amount of that river, 28%. I've seen that number a couple of times. That's just massive. It's hard to believe we would ever remove that much from a river. And I'll compare that with the oil sands here in a few minutes. So let's talk a little bit about household uses. Usually these are divided into two categories. See, category number one is public. Category number two is domestic. So this is really, for the most part, the water that a municipality is providing. So they think about it in two different ways, right? Public things, so schools and businesses and those kind of things. And two are the houses of actual people, right? And that could include apartment buildings or actual houses or whatever. And so like I said, often those things are considered separately because it involves different infrastructure and uses in public systems tend to be a little bit different, right? And depending on the type of business, whether it's, let's say it's a laundromat versus a fast food restaurant or a gas station and whatnot. And all those things kind of have different ways to think about rather than homes. And most homes are really considered very similar. It's just the number of people times, an approximate amount of water that the people need. I'll show you some breakdown of what goes on in the houses as well. So I just wanted to show you this as well. I don't know if this data is very current. It's 2006. But it kind of mirrors that map that I showed you before, in that Canada has a pretty large water footprint. And partly this is because water in Canada is cheap and it's abundant. And it's kind of, it's not a big deal for most of us. The numbers in terms of how much water people consume a day, if you look from year to year, that varies. But you can see that this is showing that about 483 liters are used per person per day for every purpose in Canada, and maybe about 250 liters in your house per person. And I'll show you some breakdowns, like I said, on that in a moment here, in terms of what we're using in our house. So there's what 250 liters looks like, by the way. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 14 of those giant jugs that you would maybe get filled up at Safeway or whatnot. So I'll show you that breakdown here. I know I have that on a slide here somewhere. This is apparently how much water we're using across the country. So Alberta is below average apparently. So that's good because I know Alberta is certainly can certainly be very above average for a lot of things, particularly around consumerism. You can see that the East Coast, some of the areas are a little bit higher than average and so on. And like I said, this kind of stuff, it varies from year to year. And it's heavily based on all sorts of things such as infrastructure and whatnot. And if you look at Alberta, there's many more newer homes in Alberta and newer neighborhoods, for example, in in Fort McMurray, they tend to have a lot more efficient water usages and efficient appliances and those kind of things, which is a big deal, of course. So this kind of mirrors that other graph I showed you. It shows you that water in Canada is cheap, dirt cheap, in a sense, right? 31 cents per cubic meter. So, I mean, not a big deal, right? If I'm using, what was that, 209 liters a day, 209 liters, like a cubic meter is 1,000 liters, right? So this means it's costing me, about 30 cents every 4 or 5 days, assuming these numbers are accurate, right? And that's not a big deal. Now they do charge us a little bit more than that because there's distribution fees and it's part of the taxing system. But in the end, we're not really, most of us aren't so concerned about this. You go to other places in the world where there's a lot of people or it's a drier place. I was looking for a desert country here, but they don't have any. And you can see that the water prices actually go up quite a bit more. So when the water prices go up, people tend to be a lot more willing to conserve water. I have a nephew in Australia, and he was telling me that they have every person has like a quota of how much water you can use in a month. And if you go over that, then the price of the water usage skyrockets quite dramatically. So he's living in Sydney, which has had drought for quite some time now. And he was telling me that, yeah, he's just gotten the habit of when he takes a shower, he turns it on, gets wet for 10 seconds, then turns it off, soaps himself up, and turns it back on. And he's trying to keep all his showers under 2 minutes for that reason. Yeah, it's kind of a different type of lifestyle, right? So just some other numbers and stats that I found on this. Water, of course, is a resource and it contributes to our economy, and numbers range, but it's definitely in the billions. All sorts of water-related goods and services, so drinking water and other things, billions of dollars, right? But here's another stat I found, and of course, sometimes it's hard to find newer numbers, but they were saying between 94 and 99, about 1 in every 4 municipalities experience some sort of water shortage. And this is something that, of course, is a big concern. That's quite a few Canadian municipalities. So one thing I want to just show you, and I thought I had, but I did not talk about it way back in first unit, is just a little bit about water consumption in the oil sand companies. So if you take a look at this this slide here, it's saying that we have about a cubic meter of crude oil consumes about 2.5 cubic meters of water. And that's actually a lot more water intensive than conventional normal oil. The bitumen, the whole process takes a lot of water. And so you can see that it has, if you look at the water allocations across Alberta, apparently that's about 7%, right? And about 66% of those allocations are in the Athabasca River. So that really means Fort McMurray. I have a video here I want to show you, and then I want to do a quick calculation for you. But here's some numbers that I was able to find. So apparently 359 million cubic meters are diverted annually. And if you look at the flow of the Athabasca River, apparently that's 633 meters cubed per second. So let me just, actually, maybe I'll do a calculation here since I have the space for it. Let's just take a look at this here. So I want to just take a look at this, 633 cubic meters. So what I want to do is convert this to basically years, right? So we're going to multiply that by 60 seconds per minute times 60 minutes per hour times 24 hours per day times 365 days per year. All right, if I punch that into my calculator, I get 2 times 10 to the 10 cubic meters per year. And if I take this 359 and divide it by the 2 times 10 to the 10, and then multiply it by 100 to get a percentage, I get about 1.8%. So if you look at it that way, the oil sands are using maybe 1.8% of the water from the Athabasca River. And in that kind of context, it really doesn't seem that significant to me. And obviously they want to conserve it and because it costs money. And that's something that the oil sands companies are thinking about all the time. But anyway, I just want to show you that calculation there in terms of the numbers that I could find regarding how much water is used by the oil sands companies. I have this short video I'm going to play for you that talks about water monitoring by the oil sands. It was produced by the Alberta government, but in partnership with the oil sands. So it's kind of pro oil sands, but you'll see it. He's just kind of talking about the monitoring here. So I'll play that for you right now. Let me just make sure I have the volume enabled.
I work for Alberta Environment, and the government of Alberta has a very extensive monitoring program in this region. We have 11 sites strategically located that continuously monitor contaminants in the Athabasca River and its tributaries. These ones here that you see collect a variety of different metals, from mercury to arsenic to the broad suite. One of the contaminants that's of primary concern are naphthenic acids, very specific to bitumen deposits and process-affected waters, and these are cutting-edge, leading-edge technology for identifying those concentrations in surface waters. We get the full range through a day, through a week, through a month, through the entire year, what the pattern of natural contaminant loading is and any additional contaminant loading that may be occurring from industry. The mines are just right nearby here. Break this stuff off like this. This is what they're after when they mine. This is oil sand, and you can push your finger right into it, as I'm doing here. It is very soft, and it flows on a warm day into the river. And if you look over here, you can see the impacts of this natural loading. You can see the oil on top of the water from the river, basically in contact with the oil sands formation that comprises the banks of this river. The industry component of monitoring is a legal requirement as part of their approval conditions. And of course, the companies have to take it very, very seriously because being out of compliance carries very stiff penalties. Companies implement groundwater monitoring, surface water monitoring, and air monitoring, as well as other metrics used to describe impacts to the landscape. All of tailings ponds have some amount of seepage. That seepage is very slow and very low, however, it does occur. And so around those tailings ponds, we need to understand exactly what the seepages are and what those seepage rates are. And we have to make sure that the seepage collection systems that they put in are effective. If there were to be a spill or some kind of upset that put more naphthenic acids into the system, we would detect it on these and we would be able to determine that that had occurred. Fortunately, our results have shown that there have been no incidences in these systems and that we're getting mostly background loading from natural sources.
Okay, anyway, just a little bit of information there on the oil sands monitoring. Now, I know that there is some controversy over these, and there's some questions about what is going on in terms of a few years ago in Fort Chipewyan and all that. Now, I can honestly not say I don't know enough about the topic to comment on it, but it is something that is taken seriously, and hoping that they will do better with these kind of things in the future. Let's talk a little bit more about water use in Canada in terms of breaking down what's going on in our house and whatnot. So there's that number again, about 42 cubic kilometers of water withdrawn and used for all sorts of reasons. And that about 14% of that is through the public utilities, right? So that means going to our towns and our houses, right? So I feel like I have these notes slightly out of order, but there's some of the uses that we talked about already. So I wanted to talk about the homes here, but there's some numbers again. So 67% thermal generation, and municipal, that includes homes, and public is about 14%. There's some more numbers for you. Yeah, sorry about this. I had spent a little bit of time reorganizing my notes and changing the topics around a little bit, and I'm sorry if I have some duplicate information. So here's agriculture, kind of going back to what we were talking about. So I know I told you 60% before. Here's a number that's saying that's 75%. And I think 60% is irrigation, and that last 15% is for livestock, if I remember correctly. But BC as well is number 2. So a lot less irrigation in these other provinces that are really known for agriculture, the prairie provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. I always find that very interesting. Here's just another map. I love these maps and these data. It's kind of interesting to see the information. And the numbers, every time I look up the numbers, they always vary a little bit. And that's where that 60% comes from right there. Here's something else that I thought was kind of interesting is the seasonal use of irrigation. And I'm not sure, oh, it's colored, okay. So, and you can see that July is the biggest red part here, which is where most provinces are getting and using water for irrigation. And there's Canada right here. You can see Canada uses a lot of water for industry and a lot less for agriculture compared to other countries. You can see Russia, a big part, or sorry, not Russia, Thailand and India, most of the water uses for agriculture and so on. And always kind of interesting to see how these things compare between different countries. So municipal water use, okay? We can break that down, and the majority is, of course, residential. And this is what we want to talk about a little bit here. And so what are we using water for in the house? And I know most people are thinking, you know, certain things, right? You've got toilets, you've got dishwashing, laundry, for food, those kind of things. But it all adds up when you think about brushing your teeth, washing your hands. In the summer, some people water their lawns or flower gardens or vegetable gardens or whatnot. People wash their vehicles. Some people have swimming pools. There's, of course, quite a number of uses for what's going on in the home, right? And so you can see that some of them are listed there in this little infographic here. And you can see that according to this infographic, our liters used per person per capita are actually on the decline, which is good. A lot of that has to do with just newer faucets and newer appliances, things like that, that can really help decrease the usage of water in a house. I feel like, I'm sorry about this. My slides are just not in the order I thought they were in. Here, this is just going back to kind of classifying the different ways we can talk about municipal use. And I had mentioned that usually it's divided into 2 categories. Sometimes these other 2 categories are added as well. Commercial and industrial use. Often commercial is put in with public use, but some commercial things that are water intensive may sometimes be in an extra category. And some manufacturers, for example, actually produce and purify their own water as well. And so often that can often be a separate category. And the other one that is thought about in terms of cities, of course, is loss. A certain amount of water is going to get lost due to leaks and inefficiencies in the system that aren't going to get delivered to homes or businesses and whatnot. So this is kind of the flow of water. And you can see that it looks complex, but it's actually not really that complex. You can see basically you have your natural flow. So your natural system in Fort McMurray, of course, is the Athabasca River, and this goes to the drinking water plant, and then it heads out to the users. Some of it is lost as leakage, and you can see that each of these categories, in theory, has a little bit of leakage going on. We use the water, and some of the water is sent to the wastewater treatment plant. Some of the water is stormwater wastage, of which some of that it goes back to the wastewater plant, and some of it goes in ponds and whatnot. And this is something we're going to talk about, wastewater and things like that eventually here. And eventually, water that goes to the wastewater treatment plant, of course, is sent back to the environment. So it's not as complex as it looks. And like I said, we're going to talk about drinking water treatment and how that works. And then wastewater is a little bit more complex because often we talk about 2 systems, stormwater and then the household waste, which is usually considered a separate thing. This is something else that I've been thinking about a little bit last few years is outdoor water use, because it seems like, I don't know what's going on, but everyone seems to be using sprinklers a lot more often, and for watering gardens and lawns and whatnot, and I feel like it's really on the increase. And so just something, I found this data on it, and you can see that apparently it's pretty high usage in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So I guess we like our lawns and our gardens. So I'm just going to exit this for a second because I really feel like I'm missing some slides and just want to take a look and see what I did with them. So just hold on a second. For some reason, I feel like, oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. The slides I'm looking for are coming up. They're just not in the order I anticipated they were in. So, again, sorry about the confusion there. Trying to make things more organized, and I think I succeeded in doing the exact opposite. Isn't that fun? So water is treated and it's ready to go out to the people. And so there's some requirements around this in terms of the amount of water and all that. And we'll talk about the cleanliness of water and the water parameters, but something to think about is the amount of quantity and pressure requirements. And so this is going to obviously depend on the number of people that are found in the city or the town. The types of businesses, you know, whether you have water intensive businesses like laundromats and swimming pools. You also have to have water for firefighting in case there is a fire and those kind of things. And of course, you know, cities have parks and recreational facilities that require water. And sometimes there are other recreational uses for it, right? So all these things go into a massive formula when they're trying to figure out how much water is needed. And usually what they do is when they make the water plant, they're going to overcompensate for this, right? They're thinking about future growth or future unknown future uses and so on. And so you can see that the water pressure that they're looking for is in a distribution system. There's actually pressure values that they're looking at. So about 450 to 760 kPa. And they don't want it to drop below a certain amount. And so why do we need that amount of pressure? A big part of it is for firefighting. And so often this has its own name. It's called needed fire flow. And so you've got your fire hydrant, and every fire hydrant has a different kind of NFF. And it kind of depends on what's going on. How many people are in that street? You have an apartment building with 6 floors, or do you just have a duplex with 1 or 2 floors? Those kind of things. And I think I have a chart here that shows some of the needed fire flow parameters. This is in American units, but you get the idea is that, you know, in this chart is talking about the distance between buildings and those kind of things. And so if there's more distance, you need, more people, you need more pressure and those kind of things. So here's another really interesting thing. And if you take a look at the amount of water that's needed in a city or town with time during the day, you have peak usages areas. So if you take a look at this, the middle of the night, right? We start over here in the middle of the night. So, you know, 3 a.m. People are not using water at 3 a.m. Most people are not anyway. If you run your dishwasher at night, usually it's done by then. Nobody's getting up in the middle of the night to have showers, those kind of things. It starts to peak. You can see right here. This is about 7 or 8 a.m. Everyone wakes up. Everyone has a shower. They, you know, go to the washroom, use the toilet, and so on. Kind of gets a little bit lower. And peak usage during the day is actually around 6 or 7 p.m. And then it flattens down. So this is what most cities look like. And the interesting thing was, and this is something we can ask if we end up going on our field trip to the water treatment plant, is what it looks like during the day. Because every year I've asked that question, I get different answers. Apparently in Fort McMurray, it's a lot flatter because we have a lot more shift working going on. And so there is a lot more water usage during the night. But again, something to ask them because I think we get different answers every time I talk to them. But how, you know, one thing I want to talk about is how we can deal with this kind of thing, because there's going to be a lot of stress on the systems in these peak demand areas, and there are ways we can deal with that, and I'll get to that in a moment. So let's look at our what we're actually using the water in the house for. Biggest amount of water is for showers or baths. And I did this not too long ago, and I totally forgot the numbers, but what I did is I went in the shower and I brought an ice cream bucket, and I collected water for, I think it was 20 seconds, and then I multiplied that by my shower, and my shower that day was 10 minutes. And I was surprised how much water I actually used. Toilets are number 2, laundry is number 3, kitchen and drinking number 4, and cleaning is number 5. So showers and toilets are the big ones. And like I said, these numbers can vary quite a bit just based on what type of home a person has, the type of shower head, the type of toilet. Newer toilets tend to use a lot less water than older toilets. And of course, for laundry and kitchen and drinking and cleaning and those kind of things, newer dishwashers are so much more efficient than older ones and so on, those kind of things. I guess we looked at this already, just looking at different countries, but you can see that, for example, we do have Israel on this list, which I think is interesting because Israel is a very dry country. And so they're using a lot less water per person per day, probably because it costs a lot more there as well. Okay, yeah, so I found some, for a not so random Fort McMurray House School. I don't know why I put that title in there, but I did find some Fort McMurray data. And so this is saying that 42 cubic meters are used per day in March and April of 2019. Used between March and April of 2019. So I did the math on this, and I found this was the number I came up with. So like I said, I don't know where the numbers come from, but when I found this stat, I did the calculation, that's what I came up with. So it's certainly a lot less than 200, and I don't know whether that's because there are newer homes in Fort McMurray or not. But anyway, I find numbers interesting, but sometimes the stats aren't always reliable. Here's Alberta again, looking at per capita residential use, and we've already talked about this. I guess Alberta is kind of on the low end per capita. And let's see here. Yeah, I'm really sorry I have all this repeat of data. This is showing the decrease over the years up until 2011. And you can see that things are getting a little bit more efficient anyway. And then I found this other number, Wood Buffalo residents, 352 liters per day. That's for all uses, not just in the house. Okay, I guess we looked at this already as well. And so showers and laundry and toilets are the big three. Here's my information. Okay. Okay, I knew I had this somewhere. So I measured 630 milliliters of water, and I guess I measured for 5 seconds. So I don't know how accurate I was with those 5 seconds. But if I had a 5-minute shower, that would be 38 liters, right? I don't know if I ever have a 5-minute shower. I'm usually in there a little bit longer, particularly in the winter. I kind of get stuck in there because it's nice and warm. But take a look at how much water, if you go 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes for a shower, how much you can consume, right? One 10-minute shower, and I'm assuming this is probably the average for most people, is about 75 liters. So if we are using, let's say 200 liters in a day, that's almost half of the amount of water that you're using in one day. It's really quite incredible. I found some other numbers for you as well, and just to compare to a bath. So a bath is about 150 liters, and if you have an older type of shower head, these things send out about 14 liters a minute. An 8-minute shower is about 112 liters. So 10-minute shower is 140, and very close to a full bath. Standard newer shower heads are quite a bit less, and you can see that it's about 9.5 liters per minute. And apparently there are these high efficiency ones that are going to use a lot less as well. I really don't know what I have in my shower. I think I just bought it because it fit and it looks nice. I don't know whether it was standard or high efficiency, but you can't buy these older ones anymore. I think there are laws now that all shower heads have to be, well, new ones sold have to be that standard 9.5 liters per minute or less. So you can see this is showing what difference it might make. And this is from the regional municipality provided this chart. And they're showing you if you have a water efficient model of the shower versus compared to the normal one, and you know, washer, dishwasher, those kind of things, and how many liters of water you could be saving in a year, right? And anyway, just some interesting stats for you. So here's some other information from the municipality. They say a small drip can add up to about 27,000 liters per year. That's kind of crazy. Turning off your tap while you brush your teeth or shaving can save up to 6,000 or 7,000 liters per year. A typical bath uses more than a shower, and so on. So they're just trying to, of course, you know, educate people on conserving water usage. Now, what was this one all about? Oh, okay, I know what I want to talk about. So this was about 4 years ago. I don't know if everyone remembers, about 4 years ago, South Africa was having a massive water shortage. And they were asking people to try to live on 50 liters of water a day. And there were some students here at the college who did the 50-liter challenge. They tried to live on 50 liters for one day. And this is what it looks like, right? So one flush, you get one flush per day. You get 2 liters for washing your hands, 2 liters for cooking, 4 liters for cleaning, 1 liter for your pet. You get to drink 3 liters. It's a lot of drinking. Dish and laundry and body washing 10 liters. So I think, you know, these big ones here, right? The showers and laundry and toilets are the big ones that they found were hard to minimize. Because how many of us, you know, only use the toilet once per day, right? You know, it's very, very difficult. You can go on the internet, you can just find all sorts of videos of people trying this 50-liter challenge. It's actually kind of interesting. Here's a comparison of a typical North American to what they were telling people to do in Cape Town. So apparently we use the toilet 5 times per day on average. Not sure if that's accurate or not, but number of showers, a 4-minute shower. I don't think people do 4-minute showers very often. But in Cape Town, they were trying to say you gotta keep it to 1 minute. We're gonna save water for everyone. Faucet use, 38 liters per day in Canada versus 8 liters per day in Cape Town, and then laundry. So you get the idea, right? What we're looking at. And of course, everybody is very different, right? Some people wash their clothes continually. Some people wear the same pair of pants for weeks on end before washing it. And everyone's a little bit different. Okay, let me just check, see where we are with the time here. I wanted to talk a little bit about typical waterworks system in a town. And there's not a lot to say about this, so I actually might wrap it up in 5 minutes in time here. Let me just take a look here. Whether it's worth it to continue or not. I think I'll continue a little bit here, and we'll see how much I cover. And I guess whatever I don't will be for next time. A lot of this is kind of an introduction to our next few units, where we're going to talk about pollution and water treatment and things like that. So one thing to think about in a typical city water system, of course, is the source. And there are many different types of water sources. A lot of parts of Canada use lakes and reservoirs. So lakes, of course, everyone knows what a lake is. A reservoir often implies a human-made area. So it could be a man-made lake where it's dammed off or something like that to collect water and to provide, you know, so that during the drier parts of the year, there's extra water that's built up. And generally, lakes act as clarifiers, and I'll tell you what that means. It means that the water has a chance to, all the grime and everything, settle down, and often they need less treatment than other types of water. Rivers is number 2 in Canada, and river water tends to be a lot dirtier than lake water because it's moving and it's picking up silt and clay and all sorts of things as it runs along, and often requires extra clarification and purification methods. And number 3 is groundwater. And for groundwater, we're not talking about most municipalities. We're mostly talking about rural users. So farmers and whatnot have wells and those kind of things, right? And the purity can range. Sometimes it can be actually very, very pure water. Other times it's dissolving undesirable things and undesirable tastes. Just kind of depends on what's in the ground there. My parents had a well, And I can tell you, you know, for most of the year, the water was actually very clean. There were certain times of the year where it started to get a little bit of yellow color to it, which it tasted fine, but it just looked undesirable, right? Yeah, so we talked about this already, water sources in Canada, and here's the number for Alberta. 94% of our water comes from the surface, so that's rivers and lakes. So where does water come from in our municipality? I may have showed you this map here before as well. And of course, Fort McMurray, we're getting our water from the Athabasca River. Anzac as well is also getting water from the Athabasca River. Fort McKay is actually getting their water from the Ells River, which is a branch that goes on to the Athabasca River. And Fort Chipewyan, which is way up here on Lake Athabasca, it gets the water from the lake. And Janvier and Conklin, they're way down on Highway 883, and they get them from the Christina River, Christina Lake system. So a little bit of information there for you. So one thing that when water goes in, usually there's an intake, and often the intake will have some sort of grill or something like that to prevent sticks and fish and those kind of things going in. And so that's part of the design of it. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about water treatment. So here's a little thing on wells, and you can see a well is basically a big hole in the ground, and the whole thing is you want to dig down deep enough until you hit the water table, and then you want to go further. And of course, when you do that, you're going to start to collect water in that well. And there's a whole bunch of different designs out there, but generally you have a pump, and usually there's a screen, and the screen is there to prevent sand and soil and that kind of stuff coming up into your water. Lots of designs of wells. I can say I don't know a lot about them, so I'm not gonna continue talking about wells for a while. Now here's another picture of a water well. I like this one because you can see that this is the water table here. And like I said, you want to make sure you're relatively deep into the zone of saturation to get all your water needs for the year. Okay, so part 2 is on treatment, and I think what I will do is stop there, and we'll pick this up next day. Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about treatment for the rest of the semester and those kind of things.